the thoughts that just drew your attention?
You rich people.
You rich people.
Not boasting.
Not boasting.
Judgment.
Squandering judgment.
Our lives are mist or vapour.
Our lives are mist or vapour. Mercy, justice. Judging by appearances. So there's a heck of a lot in this passage, eh? And that's the difficulty of narrowing the book of James into 6 sections. If you haven't been with us the last few weeks, we're looking through the book of James, which is, I believe Adrian described as like a hard-hitting punch or something. Is that what he said? That's what he told me he was going to say. I'll take his word for it. And you know, it doesn't hold any punches, James. You know, he goes to the places things that we don't talk about. Yes? Which is difficult because we find that awkward, particularly when he talks about something that we know we don't do very well. Yeah? Does anyone find it awkward when you get called out and told you're doing something wrong? Yeah? No, you're fine with it, Karen? Yeah.
Yeah, right.
It's hard, isn't it? And he's got lots to say about those things because actually they're really important to talk about. And we're at the end of this James series, which is hard hitting, we're going into another series, which is going to be called Out of Sight, Out of Mind. And what that is the things that we don't think about, but actually are really important to think about. But we don't think about them because we don't see them. So that's going to include things like the environment. Yeah? You know, we don't see the ice caps melting. We don't see the Polynesian islands that are losing their villages. You know, we don't see the millions that are having to move because of the environment. But Jesus and the Bible has a lot to talk about that. Yeah. But because it's out of sight, it's out of mind. Some other things that are out of sight is family breakdown. That usually happens behind closed doors, doesn't it? But it's something that we need to talk about. It's awkward, but we need to talk about it. We're going to talk about loneliness. We're going to talk about spiritual warfare. We're going to talk about the soul. Those are some of the things that are going to be on our list of topics. Global trade. We don't think about factories that are over, you know, in Asia somewhere that are people are working many hours in horrible conditions, but we get a really nice t-shirt out of it. Do you know what I mean? It's out of sight, so it's out of mind. So we're going to bring some of those forward. Anyway, that's the next series. This series is on James, and Billy was scheduled to preach this morning. In fact, she wrote the sermon for this morning, but she's ill. So last night she asked if I would preach. So we're going to do a Bible study, if that's all right, because I didn't have long enough to put a sermon together. So I've got some quotes and some thoughts from Billy's sermon, but it would be unfair to preach her sermon because it's hers, and also because she tends to be very vulnerable when she preaches. Have you noticed that? It's so beautiful that she does that, and so I don't want to share some of her stories and make her vulnerable when she's not here, if you know what I mean. So I'm just going to share some insights, but we're going to do lots of thinking together. And so the first bit that we're going to look at is that section. I wonder if we could have that on the screen, Graham. Is that too annoying to do so? We'll just flip through some verses. The first verse of the reading, so chapter 2, verse 1. This is the first passage that James unpacks. So in chapter 1, he sets out his themes, and he gives us lots of one-liners of things that he's going to talk about in the rest of the letter. And in chapter 2, we've then got the first bit that he unpacks, and he actually spends an awful lot of time talking about this one thing. And some scholars suggest that that's because probably in James's community, this was an issue, the issue of favoritism. So it says, my brothers, as believers in our glorious Lord Jesus Christ, don't show favoritism. Period. Yeah? And then he unpacks that. And he goes on talking about what that looks like. If someone comes into the room and they're nicely dressed, and if someone comes into the room and they're not so nicely dressed, and you are nice to the person who's nicely dressed. Because none of us have ever done that, eh? Silence takes over. Do you know what I mean? This is hard-hitting stuff. But this is what he's talking about. Now, I don't think it's necessarily the reason that James is talking to people in his church community who've got this issue. I think this is a global issue. Yeah? I think this is, I've been across many different cultures. I was in South Korea last week and experienced a wedding that was unlike any wedding I'd ever been to before. But that's because you're in a different culture. But I find in almost every culture that I've been across, they do favoritism. Yeah? We lift certain people high, and we hide other people. Yeah? And in Jesus' community, he did something radically different. The manner in which Jesus lived his life, which James, who is Jesus' brother, would have seen him do, was that Jesus hung out with those people that we're not supposed to hang out with. That our culture says we shouldn't put as favourites. But according to Jesus, the favourites were the poor. They were the smelly people. They were the people who were thrown out of the city. They were the people whose families said, you've got blindness, so you've got some sin, so we'll kick you out of our house, and so they have to go and beg. That's what the culture was like in the ancient world. I was hearing another study recently, and I think I've talked about it in this church before, in a book that I read before, but I was hearing about it at a conference this week, which is about those places outside cities where people would throw their babies if they didn't want them. Yeah? And they threw them if they didn't want them because they would be if they were disabled. Or if they were the wrong gender. Guess which gender that is? They were just thrown out onto rubbish heaps outside the city. And no one ever did anything about it. Ever. Until a group of people who followed this leader who had been crucified on a dump outside the city and who said, let the little ones come to me. They remembered his teaching. They saw the way that he lived. And they set up what we now call orphanages. Christians went outside the cities, picked up those babies, even if they had all sorts of diseases, even if they had no money to care for them, and they brought them into their own homes and loved them, as if they were their own. Isn't that phenomenal? Now, the study that I was hearing this week, which was different than what I'd read before, is the reason partly why people would throw their babies out is because everybody, almost everybody, it's like 2 or 3% were above the poor line in the ancient world. Okay? So in that time, you had to, survival was really key. If you had another mouth to feed, you wouldn't be able to feed the rest of the family. Are you with me? So you throw your baby out so that you can survive. The Christians didn't think like that. They thought in abundance terms. And that, I think, is what James is talking about. He's saying we've seen this way that Jesus builds this community, and so let's live like that. Let's not live like the rest of the world that has favourites and people that we reject. Let's break all of that down. So the first question I want us to turn and talk to each other is, where do we, in our culture, and if you're vulnerable enough, which would be great, where do you show favouritism? Okay, so turn to the person next to you, or to the priest. Where do we in our culture show favouritism? And perhaps where do you show favouritism? It's okay to be owning your sin. We talked about that a couple of weeks ago, because he redeems us. Yes, but let's own it and be bold. So where do we show favouritism? Where do you show favouritism? If we could just pull some out. Where do we show favouritism?
Dress.
Sorry? Dress. Neighbourhoods, very true. We set up our neighbourhoods like that, don't we? There are poorer neighbourhoods. By choosing people we're more comfortable with. Do you mean choosing to hang out with people we're more comfortable with? Yes, yeah, very much. We set up our little communities and hubs of people that we are like us. Yeah? It's uncomfortable being with somebody not like you. Are you about to say something to speak, or you shuffle? Oh, shuffle. Our children, what do you mean? Because you don't choose your children.
No, but sometimes, that you don't treat them the same.
Oh, yeah. Wow, that's vulnerable, Fred. Yeah. People who think like me. Yeah, it's like we prefer people who think like me. Is that what you're saying? Yeah. Come on, sister.
I was just saying, sometimes we treat our children differently or better than other people because of ours.
Oh, yeah. That's right. So if you're in a group with, that's right, Estelle, then sometimes. It's huge, isn't it? It's totally, we do that, we prefer ourselves. If there's only a little bit of cake left at a birthday party, we sign it off to our kids. Have you ever done that? Or you do the gracious thing and let somebody else have it, but you're bitter. Do you know what I mean? It's everywhere.
It can happen the other way, that you leave your own child, because you say if you're in a, what's the saying?
it's like, yeah, so sometimes we can flip the other way, can't we? Where we're trying to show favoritism too much the other way, and actually we're biased. Sometimes that does sort of need to happen. I remember I had a voice coach at drama school, and she was a feminist, and she talked about in some things need to swing the other way to give women slightly more preferential, just to make that even. Do you know what I mean? And she said, what I don't mean is that we oppress men, but that we just need to somehow highlight them a little bit, just while we're swinging that way. And at the time, I was a early 20s boy and thought she was
Nuts.
being a crazy nuts. Yeah, but actually, that was me being scared of the fact that I was being prejudiced, and I did think less of women, and that's a terrible thing. But that was my mindset. Yes.
When my children were smaller, one of my kids said, "Can we have a Christmas to ourselves?"
Yes. No, that's so true. That's and sometimes these things are important in wisdom, but it's the issue again is deeper. Chelsea's got something to say.
Victoria's got something to say. So I don't want to cut the story off, it was the next thing.
Okay.
But I was going to go out there and be a little bit controversial and say ethnicity.
Yeah, no, that's very true. That's one of the other things we're talking about in our outside out of mind, is that we create these cultures where we're pretty much monochrome. Yeah? Because sport's another thing. Yeah, that's right. But in all of these things, we set up our things that people are like us. Yeah? We think it's safer, but actually it's counter the kingdom.
Or easier.
Or we think it's easier, but it's not easier. It's actually worse for our souls.
I just struggle a little bit with, and I don't know my favoritism, because I think about when we're on the line, I'm table about old people.
Yeah.
So we don't look at old people.
I think that's that swing thing. That actually, for a long time we've disregarded our old people. So actually, we need to, in some cases, we need to favour them. But it's not so that we oppress other people. It's that we restore them to value and honour. Yeah. Does that make sense? Yeah.
So we find favour in that.
Yeah. So we find favour in them. Yes. Yeah.
In today's society, with a blended families, it's very hard to distinguish between your stepchildren and your own children.
Yes. Yeah.
And, with my situation, I've got 4 adult stepchildren and 4 of my own children.
Yes.
I've named my children, I was saying to those here, that I treat, even though the ones in Australia are step-grandchildren, I still regard them as my grandchildren.
As your children. Yeah.
So I like one, I like all.
And if you caught that, it's that sort of the blended families that we have now, and how you care for stepchildren or step-grandchildren, seeking to show that sort of stuff. Yeah, one more, Loretta. Hard out. Those are really clear. That's why if somebody's got a drug addiction or they're homeless, we do treat them differently, don't we? Now there are occasions where it's right to treat somebody differently, but not without love. Do you know what I mean? So there are occasions where if someone is misbehaving or whatever, we need to help them learn how to do that. We would treat that person differently than someone who's behaving. But we don't do that in a favoritistic way. Do you know what I mean? Because underneath what James is talking about here is talking about attitude. And there's 2 things that he challenges about our acts of favoritism. The first is, I don't know what's on the screen, chapter 2, verse 5, it says this: listen, my beloved brothers and sisters, has not God chosen the poor in the eyes of the world to be rich in faith and to inherit the kingdom he promised? So James is flipping on his head here the thing that Jesus did. In the Beatitudes, where it says, blessed are the poor in spirit in Matthew. In Luke, it goes even further. It just says, blessed are the poor. Yeah? And then he goes on to say, woe to you who are rich, in Luke's gospel. Yeah? And that's what this is talking about here. It's saying, when Jesus came down to earth, and in fact the entire way that he set up his system, he actually prioritized the poor. Isn't that interesting? There's something there for us to wrestle with, that he has actually a favour for the poor.
But is that what he was literally just saying when you flip it? Sometimes you have to show
Favouritism.
to lift them up.
Yeah, I think that could be it. Yeah. And it may also be because Jesus always stands with the people who are oppressed. His heart can't do anything but do that. Yeah?
The thing that always bothers me is explaining to show empathy, what would you like? But it's very easy to get into patronising.
Yes, totally. When we patronise someone, we're actually crossing their will because we're thinking we know better. There's so much things to talk about. I'm just happy and then I'll move on to my point. Go ahead.
What I wanted to say about what you just said, stand with the poor rather than stand for the poor. They will not be more will be with.
That's very good. That's very good. I like that a lot. The second thing that he says, if we just skip on a few verses, it says, "It's not chosen for the poor in the world to be rich in faith." And then it moves on to verse 8. It says, "You do well if you really fulfill the royal law according to Scripture. You shall love your neighbour as yourself." Again, this is where Jesus summarises the whole of the law and the prophets. And he says, "Love the Lord your God with all your heart, mind, soul and strength, and love your neighbour as yourself." And James has highlighted this thing here. The reason he's talking about law here is that there's literally laws about showing favouritism. I don't know if you knew that, but in Leviticus 19, it says this. I'm just going to read a little bit. It says, "Speak to all the congregation of the people of Israel and say to them," this is the Lord speaking to Moses, it says, "You shall be holy, for I, the Lord your God, am holy. You shall each revere your mother and father. You shall keep my Sabbaths. I am the Lord your God. Do not turn to idols or make cast images for yourself. I am the Lord your God." And then it says this. Sorry, I've lost where "When you reap the harvest of your land, you shall not reap to the very edges of your field, or gather the gleanings of your harvest. You shall not strip your vineyard bare, or gather the fallen grapes of your vineyard. You shall leave them, the edges of your field, and the grapes that fall from your vineyard. You should leave them for the poor and the alien. I am the Lord your God." Period. Next bit. "You shall not steal. You shall not deal falsely." This is an unpacking of the Ten Commandments, yeah? "And you shall not lie to one another. You shall not defraud your neighbour. You shall not keep for yourself wages of a labourer until even the following morning. You shall not revile the deaf or put a stumbling block before the blind. You shall fear your God. I am the Lord. You shall not render an unjust judgment. You shall not be partial to the... You should not defer to the great. With justice you shall judge your neighbour." There's so much more. We get the point, don't we? Yeah? I'm just going to read a couple of things that Billy wrote, where she talked about favouritism. She said, "We get frustrated if we can't understand someone's thick accent when we ring customer support." Yeah? And inside, we wish it was a Kiwi person speaking to us. What about being gracious in that moment and trying really hard? Or perhaps when we go and learn and hang out with people who have different accents so we can learn that way. Do you know what I mean?
We old people, of course, have trouble understanding the young people.
Yeah, some of that's a language thing, and some of that is some of us speak too fast. So sorry about that. We get impatient if a receptionist fumbles through their paperwork too long looking for our information. Yeah? Because we think they're under us. Don't we? If we judge a person, we judge if a person provides incompetent advice when we want to get something fixed. Yeah? We feel uncomfortable if someone's social behaviour is different to ours. They act in a way that we don't normally act, we feel awkward. But he also talked about our celebrity culture. Celebrities get to walk on red carpets, they get penthouse suites, they have bodyguards, they get paid more than they know what to do with. They have their faces and other body parts hugely enlarged on the side of buses and billboards. We buy magazines because they have famous people on the front of them. We want to know what's happening with Meghan Markle. Anyone bought magazines? As a culture, we lift that high, don't we? We don't have a magazine of people who are struggling with their homelessness. People don't buy that because we've got a culture. And when we buy those magazines and when we celebrate those things, we're buying into that culture. We're rife with this issue. But Jesus honours the poor and the Lord tells us to do so. So my next question, we've only got a short amount of time to advance through these, is what would be the marks of our community if we didn't show favouritism? That was a double negative, sorry. If we were a community, which we try to be a kingdom family here, as we gather, a kingdom family that loves everybody, where nobody is showing favouritism, nobody is showing abuse of that, what would be the marks of our community? How would you be able to say, yes, we've done it?
You're sharing everything like the first century church.
That's good. Turn to the person next to you. 1 minute, come up with some things. Just call out some marks. So one was saying sharing our wealth. That was from John. Somebody else call out. What does that mean?
More accepting of the differences.
So that would look like listening to people who are different than us. Is that what you mean? Yeah. Listening to others. Yeah.
Being available to do a good works for other people, you don't have to talk about.
That's good. Availability. Inclusive. Yeah, it's good. What would a mark of that be? How could you tell that we're being inclusive? Yeah. So having obvious diversity. Yeah.
And I think not just having those different, whatever, diverse people, but biting our tongues when they tell us what it's like to be them.
Yeah.
To be selfless.
That's good.
Biting our middle class tongues sometimes, I think that's one of them.
So middle class tongues bitten. Is that not right? We all know what we mean, right? Maybe 2 or 3 more.
Being honestly self-aware and knowing the lens she comes to use and where it comes from.
So important, Estelle. So important to know what lens we carry. Yeah, that's why it's critical. We need to talk about these things where we show favouritism. Let's see the way we see the world. That's the first step in owning up to our mess. So knowing our lenses. Somebody said something else?
Trust. There would be more trust between each
And what
other.
would be a mark of showing trust?
Would be a bit more unity, a bit more comfort with each other.
Love.
At ease
Yeah.
with one another.
Yeah.
Yeah. It takes work, that, doesn't it? Just on this one over here about availability, this is something Bishop Justin's challenged Billy and I about quite a few times. Is Billy and I have a habit of getting excited and passionate about things, so we fill our timetable with all the things that we think is important. And he says that actually we need to live a life of 90% fullness, so that the 10% can be for when the uncomfortable and the difficult barge in. Yeah? Henri Nouwen calls it a welcome interruption. I love that thought. Yeah, because usually for me they're unwelcome interruptions.
Yeah.
But that's because I fill my life with so many things. So many things that are really good and really important. I'm happy and excited and joyful about doing those things. But there's no space when somebody needs my help. Yeah.
Even though
Maybe
we
share
should.
more.
I was just going to say something about developing intellect. If we watch the news at the moment, it's just gone over and over as to which way is the best to bring up children. Education has become hugely available because it seems to be regurgitated in the news about which is the way to bring up children and develop intellect. So just the topic of developing intellect at school.
So something that would be a mark of us being different would be
Around the edges of what you're discussing.
Yeah. Caring and training ourselves up. So helping people grow better. Is that what you mean? Is that?
Yeah.
That would yeah. And actually, that's a really point. Just learning from each other would be key, wouldn't it? Sometimes we tend to think that we've got the answer and we'll help somebody else. Yeah. And sometimes we also think that because we're middle class or educated, or because we're Christian. You know what I mean? But actually, there's a humble thing about coming on our knees to somebody else and say, "Hey, teach me. Teach me how you do this, or why do you do what you do?" Now, we may come to a conclusion at the end of that actually the way that they do stuff isn't as life-giving as what we do. But we have to listen with our lenses off. Do you know what I mean? We have to go, perhaps what you're saying actually might change my life. Yeah? That's a humble exercise.
Could we get more room for testimonies so that people can be encouraged about what is actually happening?
That's good.
Fantastic thing, generous things happen, but we don't know about them.
Yes. For instance, even in our service, is that what you mean?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I can say that we had a car stolen and somebody gave us another one. The one that was stolen was 100,000, the one we got was 20,000. And that was an old lady who said, "I don't need my car anymore, you can have it."
Amazing.
And there are stories like that all around that we would be encouraged to do more ourselves.
That's right, it's good.
Stories
Let's do that. That's a really good idea. Yeah. And ask each other those things too, you know. Let's be bold to share those good things. Okay, I'm just going to zip through. I've got some more questions, which is the next bit of the passage, which says, I think we pop over to chapter 4. It says, "Come now, you who say, today or tomorrow we'll go to such and such a town, spend a year there doing business and making money. You do not even know what tomorrow will bring. What is your life? For you are," this is the bit that Lee pointed out, "you are a mist that appears for a little while and then vanishes." What this passage is talking about, and the next one is talking about, is our desire to control things. To control our futures. Anyone like things controlled? Yeah. So what do we like to control? Turn to the person next to you. 30 seconds. What do you like to have control over? There's all sorts of things. I know there's going to be heaps. There's something that Billy wrote in her. So that Billy wrote in her sermon, which actually I'm actually quite passionate about, which is insurance. Yeah. We insure things so that if something wrong happens, we can get it back because we deserve it, right?
No,
you know what I'm going to find really difficult is that when I get into the fullness of the kingdom, I'm going to be opposite someone whose family was brought up in a slum somewhere. And they can ask me the question, or they might even discover and say, "So you spent an extra how many $100 a year so that you could keep your first world house?" I can tell you now, it already rips me to shreds. It's going to be humbling that moment, eh? But that's the whole basis of insurance. It's based upon our fear that things are going to be lost and that we deserve it.
Isn't it being a good steward of those things?
I know that's a difficult thing, and I know there's lots of people here who will be angry and annoyed at me for saying these things. But I'm saying it because it's an idol in our culture that we think that we should have things. Yeah? The whole setup of insurance is based on fear and on cultivation of our place in the world. Difficult, isn't it? It's tough. I've been in situations where I haven't insured something, I've lost it, and I haven't got it back. That's humbling. But whose thing was it in the first place?
God's.
Where did I get it from?
God.
Do I live with all of my things as though they're not mine? No. This is hard hitting, but that's what James is talking about. We like to control our things. Billy talks about that a little bit here. We haven't got time to unpack. She hits harder than I do. So, she says here about we have savings accounts and pension schemes so that we've got money later in life. Now, don't get me wrong. Being wise with our stuff is important. And in fact, there's lots of scriptures that talk about being wise with our things. But the issue, and we know what the issue is, it's our attitude, isn't it? If it comes from a place of fear, or a place of cultivation for ourselves, or favouring ourselves over other people, that's not the community of love. What would our lives be like if we didn't control them? Scary. Custard. What I'm actually talking about here, is the control out of fear. What would happen if you eradicated fear from your life? Wouldn't that be amazing? If it's okay if that thing gets lost. Do you know what I mean? Sorry?
So it's sort of, I've just had an experience this week where I've halved my insurance for my contents because I just cannot afford it.
Yeah.
And I think, so what? Anything happens?
That's right.
I just have to live more simply.
Yes.
And the grace that my insurance guy, he said, recommended that I move away from the company that I am and go to another company. He gets commission, obviously, from the people that sells me, but he just recommended I go to a completely different company for my car insurance because of what they can give me as opposed to what I get to pay.
All of this stuff's complicated, but all of this stuff is, we've got to orientate our attitudes on. Yes? And James is inviting us into a life where we have a community where we don't favour ourselves, we don't favour people who look like us, we favour everyone, and we love on people, and we're particularly kind to those people who have been oppressed, whether that's people who've been oppressed in their families, or people who are poor or have been looked over. Just imagine what our family and our community would look like if we were known in this city as a community that didn't show favoritism. Anybody could walk in here and they would be loved. And they would be loved on. That there's unlimited grace and resources. Wouldn't that be a lovely place to live and be? That's what he invites us into, and that's what the kingdom looks like. That's what James is saying. So the last thought that I've got, and I just want you to think about this on your own in silence, is how do we get there? It has to be practical, it has to be personal. What can you do to help cultivate a community where there's no favoritism and we don't seek after ourselves, but we love others?
Sometimes when you're on your own, if you take that little step, you sometimes in your mind think, oh, you're not really making a big difference. But lots of little people are doing
That's right.
similar things that makes you.
And it's always something small and simple and practical. A couple of things that Billy and I try to do is that we, whenever anything breaks in our house, I think she's shared this in the sermon before, first thing we say is, I love you. Yeah? Because it prioritises that more important than that teapot or window or whatever is the person. True? How funny that when something breaks we get annoyed. That's because we're holding on to it. You know what I mean? We highlight that as more important. We shout at our kids when they spill something. Don't we? Because we think the carpet's more important than them. Yeah? There is enough grace in the kingdom of heaven if we step into this. And the beauty will be phenomenal. Yeah? The impact that we will make. Last thing to Landon was I had a question at the end of this conference that I was at on Thursday, and the question was, how are we radically different? How will people in the world see us as different? And the person who was next to me said, we need to be beautiful. Because God is beautiful. Yeah? Beauty is something that the world doesn't offer. Not real beauty. But Jesus does. A community that does that kind of love is beautiful. Let's pray.